but so let's try and focus because I know you've only got about 20 minutes, right? And I
A
do
bit
want to
less
get.
than that, sadly, today, but
Yes,
we'll
because
pick this up.
we messed up the Zoom. So let's try and whiz through
Yeah.
what we were going to talk to today. But I just wanted to say that basically the format of this is I read quite a lot of contemporary stuff at the moment. Simon, because he has a very important job and is constantly flying around the world to Paris and much further, doesn't have that much time to read.
It's the
So
infant. I'm
what
blaming the infant, really. I mean, I should be reading on flights. I'm just too tired.
Yeah, well, you're too tired because you're very busy and important. But so I'm going to talk about the stuff that I've been reading that I like, and Simon is going to talk about some older stuff, and I've been reading some older stuff as well that Simon has directed me to. So that's kind of what we're hoping to do
Yeah,
as the format for these chats, and just branch out into some of our general thoughts about the genre because we have them, don't we? We have many thoughts.
we do. Lots
We
of voices.
do.
Lots of voices.
So it was Simon's birthday a few weeks ago, and I said to him, "Look, I will have. There are three books that I think you'd really like that I've read in the last year. Um, which one do you want? Because I know you're not going to have time to read three. And you liked the one I got you last year, didn't you? Ninth
Loved it.
House, which
Loved it.
Ninth House, which I love it so much. I've got it on my shelf.
I
There is
loved it
it.
so much. I got it for somebody else who doesn't read sci-fi, doesn't read a lot of sci-fi and fantasy for Christmas because they on a kind of book, kind of work book exchange. I loved it that much. Yeah, it was great.
Oh, great. So yeah, that's one of my favorite. Like, it's an urban fantasy series, dark academia, set at Yale. Um, with using ghosts in a really interesting way as well, I thought. Like I'm seeing more books with ghosts in them at the moment. I feel like ghosts are making a bit of a comeback. And one of the books, so one of the three books that I suggested that I get you for your birthday is a book that has ghosts in an interesting way, and it is She Who Became the Sun, which was actually written in I think 2021. So it's not like brand new. It's part of a duology. It's real grim dark fantasy with a focus on the historic. People always say it's more historical fiction than actual fantasy, but it has got some really interesting fantasy concepts in it. It's basically it's by a Chinese diaspora writer based in Australia called Shelley Parker Chan, and they they are doing a kind of queer retelling of a really important part of 14th century medieval Chinese history. But they use the Buddhist concept of hungry ghosts in a really interesting way. The idea that there are these ghosts who have died in quite a traumatic way and are stuck
Yeah.
in between incarnations. I believe in that philosophical system. One moves on fairly soon to one's next incarnation, unless one is a hungry ghost and is trapped in this place of extreme emotional anguish that one experienced at the moment of one's death, and then and but that they're actually very hostile to life, and they try and eat, I think it's energy. I might be saying this wrong, but anyway, I thought the ghost concept was used really well in that,
Yeah.
and I think it's really good historical fiction. It's grim dark. So this got the thumbs down from Simon because I mentioned content warning. The main character does kill a child near the end, and so that got your content warning thumbs down, didn't it?
Yeah, I mean, those who know me well will know that actually, I'm a bit squeamish about children getting killed. I think because
You're not alone. This is okay. That is
I
a
read it as a child. I was pretty close to Johnny's age when he gets his arm ripped off, and I'm a bit funny about it. And then I've got worse since I've had children myself.
Yeah. It
So
gets like really deeply
I can
upsetting,
do it as
doesn't
long
it?
as I know it's coming, but it's not like I have to kind of prep myself for it, which is quite a weird confession.
Yeah, no, I didn't want to get something that upset you. And actually, this has another content warning for me for
Yeah.
a major character death, which
Yeah.
I don't think you would find as upsetting as I did. It was part of a romantic relationship, not the main relationship, not the main character's
Yeah, yeah,
relationship, but a secondary romantic pairing that I got really into. I like really wanted them to get together, and one died. So
yeah.
I mean, I got actually really upset for about 2 days. So, but it is really good. So, just a bit grimdark. So that got the thumbs down because of child's death. And this which I also really like and suggested as a birthday book, also got the thumbs down from Simon, because I mentioned that it starts off with the main character. One of her children is killed and
same
the
problem.
other one is taken, and she spends
Yeah.
most of the trilogy looking for her missing child. And I think you felt that would be a bit too upsetting as
At the
well.
moment, a bit raw. Yeah, it's weird.
It's no, but it's like I'm like that. I'm more like that with animals.
Yeah.
But
Animals, I
like, yeah,
couldn't care less. Well, no,
like
I say that.
anything
Never ending
where
story.
anything where a dog is even slightly upset, I'm like, no, I'm not reading that. I did read Bergman Island, a film my friend recommended to me, and it had a warning for animal cruelty in it. And I looked it up and it said the characters throw jellyfish at each other at one point, and I was like, do you know what? I can handle that. That's okay.
I mean, I don't
But
know. It's
that's
interesting
about
when
my
you
limit.
talks, isn't it? Because my brain's already sparking about stuff like, thinking about where you were mentioning about getting upset about character death. The depth of my sorrow and horror reading the Dragonlance Chronicles when I was about 10 or 11, when one of the love interests turned out to be a baddie. It was like, I can't tell you. I think I prayed to God at the time. I was semi-religious at the time.
Oh my God, it's so
Yeah, it's
upsetting.
weird,
Like
isn't
as a
it?
child, I remember when I was about 7 or 8 and reading a novel which you probably haven't read, because it's a novel that's given to little AFAB people.
Yeah.
Um, but it's called Black Beauty, and it's about
Oh
horses. It
no,
was
I've
kind
read Black
of,
Beauty. Yeah.
oh my God, so when Ginger dies, like Ginger is,
Yeah.
I'm sorry to spoiler Black Beauty for anyone who hasn't read Black Beauty as a child, but
Might be,
basically
I might be a TV show. I remember. I think I remember the theme tune. I think maybe.
oh my God, I haven't seen that. But like Black Beauty, the horse main character, has this friend called Ginger, and halfway through Ginger dies. And I remember being so like shocked, and I actually just took it to my father. I was like, this isn't something just happened in this book that isn't allowed. And I actually genuinely had this belief at 8 or 9 years old that books weren't allowed to do that.
Yeah. Feels like
I was like,
doesn't it?
fuck.
And then,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah. Well, I'm wondering, like, for again, Game of Thrones is interesting, isn't it? Because actually, I think in a way, there's quite a lot of child death in that, but not as much as there could be.
Yeah, and there is that in the first episode of the TV series. I haven't read the books. I know you have, but where Bran just gets pushed out of the
Yeah,
window by Jaime
100%.
Lannister, who we're
Yeah.
then like sort of supposed to go on and like kind of root for a bit and fancy.
Yeah, it's complex. But there's these wolves,
It's obviously complex, yes.
these wolf cubs that are adopted by the Stark kids, and they all pretty much come to sticky ends. And I think it feels like a proxy
Oh
for
yeah,
what
that
George Martin might have done if it was, truly kind of historical epic, which is that, lots. I mean, there's lots of child death in it, but it feels like it may be a way of softening that a little bit. It's interesting. Anyway, we got about
it is interesting.
also,
No,
what we can do is pause this and pick it up again as well. So we could.
we can pause this and pick it up again. I am just briefly going to talk about this book because I do think this is a
Sorry.
really, really great trilogy. It
Yeah.
is also slightly old. This first book in the trilogy was written in 2012, and N.K. Jemisin has subsequently written another duology. But I just thought these books were wonderful. So these books are in the sci-fi fantasy space, in that they're set on an alien planet, but it's not deeply science based. But what it has, which I just think is extraordinary, just the most interesting and extraordinary world building. I mean, it's a basic sort of dystopian concept in that the earth is deeply unstable in this book. There are volcanic eruptions and earthquakes all over the place, meaning that human societies can't evolve very far. Like if you build a city and it's going to be destroyed in 15 years time, probably max. And a lot of people have even resorted to just being wandering tribes, and they're aware that they're aware that there was something they called old Civ, that there's an older, much more advanced civilization which they don't know much about, which they see remnants of hanging around. But because the earth is so unstable and they feel the earth is really hostile, they can't really engage with it. So it's about this character who's wandering through this kind of blasted, unstable landscape, seeking her child. And she's one of a group of people who, for some reason, which gets gradually clarified, have the ability to manipulate the earth and actually just kind of reach down some kind of power into the substrata and move rocks and metal and lava and to some extent manipulate the earth. And they're vilified and feared because of this, but also prized and asked to do things to stabilize fault lines and so forth. And it's just, without getting too much into the plot, it was just one of the best examples I've ever seen of an environmental book, that wasn't preachy, but just treated the earth as something like, once the earth, there's a line, I think, in the third book, which is like, the earth changes very slowly until suddenly it doesn't. And that's sort of like what we're approaching now, maybe arguably, with climate change. And it's very environmental, but not in a sort of naturey, loving animals sort of way. It's like really graphic in terms of rocks and metals and what the earth is doing and what is under the ground, and that being something that's hostile and dangerous, and everyone's attention and energy being focused on the ground. I just thought it was extraordinarily interesting and really quite revelatory about a lot of stuff in a great world building way. So I liked that. I do think you should read it at some point, maybe
I
when
will.
your
I
baby's
will. I mean,
older.
when my baby's older. I mean, the other thing, again, just the way my brain works, is that suddenly I'm thinking of the Book of the New Sun, Gene Wolfe,
Yeah,
and the fact that opposed the
I
post
shall get this.
idea that all texts are in communication with each other anyway. But I think very often in science fiction and fantasy, that is a really active conversation, sometimes by a process of osmosis. But yeah, I mean that's a trailblazer, isn't it? In many respects, an outlier, because that book is in
It
that.
really is. And I just read I read it, as you know, on your recommendation. This is again an old series written in the 80s, which is set on a far future Earth, in which a very, very, very far in the future, like so far in the future that the sun has turned into a red giant and grown much larger and is at the point of maybe about to engulf the earth. And human civilization has in the past advanced to great heights. It's known that people have traveled to other planets, that people have planted things on the moon, that aliens have come back to Earth, but people can't remember quite how that happened, and things have reverted to a kind of medieval
Dark Age. Yeah.
dark age place, and they're surrounded by all this former civilization, but they don't quite know how to use it. I mean, I think there are problematic things about this book in terms of sexual politics, but I thought the world building was extraordinary. I've only read the first two books in the
Me
quartet.
too, actually. Me too. Yeah, me too.
I really liked it. And do you know what? I read H.G. Wells's The Time Machine recently, actually. Let's see if I can pull that off the shelf to show viewers. No, I can't see it at the moment. But what I realized is in H.G. Wells' The Time Machine, the time traveler travels into the very far future, and also goes to a civilization which is very decadent and weak compared to the civilizations in the past, and where the sun is red, and it eventually moves forward to the end of time, where the sun is about to engulf the earth. And that was clearly an inspiration for the Book of the New Sun. I thought that was really interesting as well. I don't know if you've read that.
I think it's one of those things where you go, have I read it, or have I just read about it? So I think I probably haven't, and I've certainly again seen the TV version as a kid.
I haven't read, but I've been reading. I've read two H.G. Wells novels recently, and I thought he's really good.
Definitely go back and read, or rediscover, or discover, in fact, depending on how my memory works.
We should do an episode on H.G. Wells, but let me just whiz through these things that I was planning to do. So the book that Simon did want to have for his birthday is, I actually haven't
know what
got
it was.
it.
It was a surprise, right? So I didn't know this.
Yes, this was Robin Hobb's Assassin's Apprentice, which I actually haven't got because I lent it to my mum. But I've got the third book in the trilogy, so it's part of the Farthia trilogy. I'm reading the third book at the moment. Look, if you get into it, Simon, the book I sent you is quite short, but look how good. That
Yeah,
they get by
classic,
the end.
classic fantasy trope. That start them short, make them longer.
Yeah, so like I said, I think these are really just really well written books. I don't think they're doing, like I said to you, I don't think they're doing anything particular. Like N.K. Jemisin, who wrote this book, I think she is doing something genuinely innovative and transformative with the with the genre. And
Yeah,
she's a black writer of fantasy as well, so she brings like a black person's
yeah,
perspective to it. I think it's genuinely a really fresh take on a lot of stuff. This is much more classic fantasy. It's set in a medieval setting. There are kind of knights and castles and warring kingdoms.
yeah.
But there's a magic system which I really like. It's a magic system based on telepathy, which is something which I find is interesting because it allows you to explore a lot of psychology between people, between characters who can practice telepathy. I found that quite interesting. And I just thought it was like George R. R. Martin, he who wrote Game of Thrones, George R. R. Martin level, like just good, really good characters and good plot. So I hope you like it.
I'm looking forward to reading it. Um, Jay, we've done our intro and we haven't got to Lord of Light, but I think, going to have to pause this.
Really?
No,
Can do Lord of Light now if you want, but we could
let's do a little intro just because Asta needs a nap, so I've got
do
to
you
go.
want to introduce Lord of Light?
But yeah, let me talk about it. So Asta, by the way, Asta is my youngest son for anybody watching this.
Sorry, Asta, if we're disturbing you from
All
your
right,
nap. Is,
I'm in
is
his
Asta
bedroom.
is Asta awake at the moment and being good?
Yes, you grand. Yeah, it's just time for naps.
Yeah.
So, Lord of Light. Well, I read Lord of Light. I think we should then end this with a cliffhanger because we'll pick it up from here. So I read Lord of Light
Make it sound good, right, Simon, so people
in
can't
my early
wait to hear
20s.
it.
In my early 20s, and when I was at drama school, I'm an actor. That's my job. And when I was at drama school, there was a Canadian guy in my year. Was he Canadian or American? I can't remember now. Eric, and he was into
Apologies, Eric, if we've got your nationality wrong.
he was into lots of the same kind of fantasy as me. I was reading a lot of graphic novels at the time. He got me into Preacher, things like that. And then that you'll notice that that's a sci-fi masterworks edition, and that was a big thing for lots of people in the early 21st century. Sci-fi masterworks, the Galanches kind of re-edition of lots of these classic novels. And he just gave it to me and said, "You need to read this." And I haven't read it for 20 years, 25 years, but I really enjoyed it at the time. It really stuck with me. And essentially speaking, it's a science fiction fantasy hybrid, and the reason that hybridity works is that the kind of world building and the kind of plot device is that the characters in it are presented as kind of avatars from the Hindu religion, and that's how the kind of science fiction and fantasy get enmeshed together. And from what I remember, there's a kind of trope of the eternal champion. That's a reference to Michael Moorcock, but this central idea in some fantasy that comes from him, that there's a kind of eternal conflict, a cycle of conflict that perpetrates itself throughout the novel, which, from my memory, sits alongside the idea of kind of reincarnation as well. So that's my memory of it. I remember
Yeah, I mean,
it being a really fantastic read, and I've not read it for 25 years. So there we are.
great. Well, I can expand on how it uses reincarnation and what the plot actually is because I read it more recently, but I don't know if we have time or if we should do that
I
next
think we
time.
should pause it and pick this up. But I think this is
Okay.
great. I really
To be
enjoyed it.
considered, I will just say about this book that Arthur C. Clarke, who is one of the great classic 20th century, no, George R. R. Martin said this again from Game of Thrones. He said it was one of the top five sci-fi and fantasy novels ever written.
It is
So
regarded as that, isn't it? And then
it is regarded as that. It definitely has that reputation. He's not the only person who thinks that. And it draws on something that Arthur C. Clarke, one of the 20th century godfathers of sci-fi, said, which is that any science that is sufficiently advanced, any scientific system that's sufficiently advanced, will appear to people as magic. And I think that's a key concept in here. But to be continued. To be continued.
Thank you, Jay.
Thank you,
Really
Simon.
enjoyed that a
Go
lot.
and put your baby to sleep. Thank
I
you for talking
will.
about books with me.
We'll pick it up. We'll pick it up very soon. From there, we'll pick
Okay.
up from where we got to. Yeah.
All right.
Right.
Okay,
Bye.
bye.